So we're live on Facebook. We're recording here, letting people in.
Now on Facebook, which has been called a doomsday machine by the Atlantic.
I heard about that. Yeah. All right. Oops. There we go. All right. So, all right, here we go. Welcome to the next installment of a Freethinker's Corner, A Nightmare Before Christmas author series. Tonight, we have Errick Nunnally. And Errick is an author and designer. He's the author of the trilogy Blood for Son, All the Dead Men, forthcoming The Headless Woman, all published by Haverhill House Publishing. And he also has upcoming The Queen of Saturn and The Prince of Exile. He's a co-editor of the fanzine Journey Planet. And as I said, he's a graphic designer by trade, and he's also a former Marine. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
He likes comics and art. And welcome, Errick.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here. I watched a couple of these leading up to this, and pretty cool.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and get started with your trilogy. What was it like to write a trilogy?
Looking back on it, it's kind of the easiest thing that I've done as an author so far. And I think that's only because the main character, Alexander Smith, had been with me for so long. So the whole series, for anybody who doesn't know, is about a long-lived werewolf who's suffering from a kind of supernatural Alzheimer's. And this is someone who was born in the late 1800s. So he's been around for a couple hundred years. And he's figured out that if he solves cases of missing or murdered children, that it keeps his mind intact in terms of figuring out puzzles. So far we've had two of them published by Haverhill House, or the subprint of it, Twisted Publishing. And the third, The Headless Woman, which I haven't talked about at all with anybody ever until now, will be the end of the trilogy. But these things never really end.
Awesome. Did you want to do you mentioned that you wanted to do a reading from one of them?
Yeah, well, what I'd like to do is a reading from my work in progress.
Okay.
I like to have that break that up into two pieces. So this is a it's something that's essentially going to be published when I finish it, and it's very different than a number of other things I've written. And the genesis of it, it's the Queen of Saturn and the Prince in Exile, and it is loosely based on my life when I was younger, and it's also set a little further into the past than when I was young. So it takes place in the mid to late 70s, and this came about because I was doing an interview with Chris Golden in Haverhill, and he had asked me some questions about my childhood, and I told him a couple stories. And between him and Bracken McLeod, they harassed me literally for weeks to write something around this. He's like, "Oh, you totally got to write that. You totally got to write that." And it struck me as like a coming of age story. I've never really liked coming of age stories, but on the other hand, I'd never seen one that was from a perspective that I'm familiar with characters and people that I would have ever seen when I was growing up. So I started writing this thing, and we have a publisher. I'm not going to say who it is, and we don't have a in particular publication date yet, but I'd like to read two pieces, and the first one's going to be about 10 minutes, and the second one's about 10 minutes. So we can break that up with some other chit chat along the way. So this is the opening chapter of The Queen of Saturn and the Prince in Exile. The cold scalded the inside of Sean's nose, and he felt his eyelashes icing over. DJ, the smallest, had shimmied through the basement window first, followed by Jerry, the tallest but slimmest. And now it was Sean's turn. He turned around and lowered himself to the snow-covered ground, scooting backwards until his rubber-booted feet dangled in space. "Hurry up," Mike said. He was the latest addition to the group. Sean was about the same size as the spectacled boy and knew his friend would have the same sort of trouble. It wasn't clear how DJ had managed, considering his height. "I'm going as fast as I can, Peabody. Give me a second." "Don't call me that. I hate it." Mike shoved his black-rimmed glasses back up his nose. "Yeah, I know," Sean grunted and slipped all the way through the window, grateful when his toes brushed a solid surface. Mike slipped through even faster after Sean's example. Thick ice coated every surface in the basement. Rivulets of solid blue and white hung at a frozen cascade. The basement had been transformed into an ice cave, like something from a science fiction movie. Only this was real. The triple-decker had burned 3 nights ago, and temperatures had been holding well below freezing since then. The tragedy happened all too often, when frigid temperatures settled in the region and heaters ran all night. Like the news, the boys haven't given much thought to who had lived in the building, how their lives were upended and possessions lost. Their only thoughts were on seeing how thousands of gallons of water dumped on the building by the fire department had settled. "Wow," Sean said as Mike stood next to him. "Yeah," Mike answered. DJ slid into view, looking like a Muppet raised in the hood. Like all the boys, he wore multiple layers of mix-and-match hand-me-downs. His eyes were as round as they could be, above the scarf wrapped around his head. "This is incredible," DJ said. From the other end of the basement, they heard a crash and the tinkle of broken ice. "Hey, check this out," Jerry called. He found a thick column of ice that looked like a stalactite and stalagmite had met and grown to the width of an adult man. In both hands, he held a pipe and took another whack at the column, showering the boys with shards of ice. In addition to being the tallest, Jerry was the oldest by 2 years, but his lack of progress in school put him in with the other 3 boys. Quiet, with an ever-deepening interest in music, he'd begun collecting records last year. He'd even bought the soundtrack to Grease and forced them all to listen to it, more than once, in a bid to convince them of the music's quality. Jerry had gone to the movie alone, since none of them could bring themselves to watch Vinnie Barbarino singing and dancing. That was the sort of thing white folks did. It was embarrassing. They scattered to explore. Sean circumnavigated the basement, touching the ice as he went. It was bumpy, frozen in mid-flow, too thick to break easily. The floor was covered by at least 6 inches of ice that curved at the walls. DJ slid by, almost choking on his obnoxious laugh, and Sean heard another crash of ice from Jerry. Mike stumbled into view, his hard rubber soles barely finding purchase on the ice. "You find anything cool?" Sean shrugged and said, "Just ice, more ice. I keep expecting Box to show up." It was the kind of sci-fi detail joke that only Mike would pick up on. He grinned and snorted, moving past Sean to keep exploring. Jerry kept whacking at the ice column, and DJ continued to slide back and forth. Sean's mind wandered. The icy space reminded him of stories his mother, Sojourner, told him about her home planet. The crystal caves her people had carved on Saturn to survive beneath the gas giant's surface. She liked to remind him that she was over 1,000 years old and an exiled queen. It was the sort of bright imagining the mother who'd read comic books to her son came up with. The most fascinating thing about her stories were how consistent they were, as she clung to them without change. And sometimes he wondered. A thunderous collapse of ice grabbed everyone's attention. Giant ice blocks thumped loudly in the basement as Jerry's demolition project collapsed. An eerie silence fell, and for the briefest of moments, Sean wondered if Jerry had been buried. He peeked around the corner and saw Jerry up against an icy wall. The tall boy had dropped his bludgeon and now stood with a look of unabashed surprise on his face. He started to giggle. It was infectious. Before long, they all laughed at the bright moment's fear. "Hey, maybe we should keep it down," Sean said through a final snort. Movement outside the window caught his eye, and he startled. A shadow had passed in front of the window. In the next window stood a pair of legs wearing blue pants and work boots. The figure squatted, and a craggy older man with puffy cheeks and a thick salt and pepper mustache peeked in. His girth and age prevented him from bending far enough to easily look in the window. DJ had seen him too. "Oh, shit." Jerry sidled up to Sean and asked, "What?" Sean said, "Someone's out there." The man straightened, and the boys watched his legs take long strides to the rear of the building. For a moment, there was nothing but silence except for the occasional crack of ice. A deep male voice shouted through the basement door, shattering their nerves. "Who the hell's fucking around in there?" The basement door rattled. It was jammed by all the ice. The boys panicked and scrambled for the window. DJ got up to the window first, and they pushed him through. Then Mike and Sean wiggled through. Jerry only had head and shoulders out when they heard the man coming around the corner. They all looked, nearly frozen with fear, and Jerry made a strangled noise. Sean shouted at DJ, "Help me!" They both grabbed Jerry's arms and pulled him out of the window so fast that they were able to stumble into motion, running away from the man towards Norfolk Street. The old man couldn't keep pace, but he swore long and hard at their backs. They rounded the corner and ran as fast as they could, 1 block and into the park, where they stopped, panting and laughing. DJ flopped to the ground and rolled down a small hill leading to the playing field. Further along, there were dozens of kids sliding down the hill. Some had sleds, most were using pieces of cardboard, and one group of 3 had the hood of a car beneath them as they went screaming down the steepest hill. "I wish we had a sled," Sean said to no one in particular, breath still coming in heaves. "Yeah, me too," Jerry replied. DJ was still at the bottom of the hill, laughing and likely soaked from all the snow he was tossing around. Mike shook his head at the spectacle and said, "Let's go find something to slide with." The boys agreed and called to DJ, who was so self-involved with play that he didn't hear them. Mike shouted, "Hey, baby George, let's go." DJ stopped abruptly and surged to his feet, angry. They all knew he hated the nickname as much for his stature as a passing resemblance to Sherman Helmsley. His light-skinned face, already red from the cold, seemed to get even redder. "Pay attention, fool," Sean called. "We're going, come on." And the rest of the day went like that, with the boys occasionally wanting and then not receiving. What they did have was each other, however, for as long as that would last. The blizzard came the following month, a huge storm that dropped several feet of snow on Boston and the surrounding regions. Its severity surprised everyone, stranding cars and grinding the city to a standstill. Nothing moved, no buses, no cars, no trucks. There was no sign of plows or tractors of any sort. After 2 days of bone-numbing cold and wet, playing in the snow, enjoying the unexpected time off, Sean found himself stuck inside while his cold weather clothes slowly air-dried in the cool front hallway. He helped his father with shoveling as much as he could, but now he sat, arms and legs fatigued, resting with a cup of cocoa his mother had prepared. It wasn't much worse than pulling on wet clothes to go outside, so maybe tomorrow or the day after. The snow didn't appear to be going anywhere, anytime soon. His room was a hodgepodge of past and present, toys of little interest strewn about with books and art materials. He thumbed through an Avengers comic for what seemed like the millionth time, every line of dialogue, artwork, and advertisement committed to memory. In the hallway, one of the largest features of the apartment, his mother ran a ragged jigsaw, cutting a thick piece of wood into a puzzle. He supposed it was the last one he'd seen her working on, a close-up of the Hulk's face, hand-drawn in Trimpe style and painted in her own. Beneath the heavy metal desk in the corner, jetsam from his father's old offices, were the rest of Sean's comics in a cardboard box. He took the pile next to him and swapped them for the oldest set, the comics his mother used to read him when he was 4 or 5 years old. Flipping through the stack, it was mostly Kirby and Lee's creation. Thor was a title his mother had read with the most gusto, but she'd especially enjoyed the Hulk, a simple-minded but powerful being who wished only to be left alone. He reminded her of Frankenstein's monster. She also had a shine for the Thing, the Fantastic Four fame, a man trapped in a rock-like body, struggling with the fact of his heroism in the face of his disfigured form. She'd once created an art piece out of clay affixed to a 5-foot board by fashioning each rocky scale of the Thing's hide and painting it accordingly. Sean thought it was magnificent, but it had no home in the increasingly crowded apartment, a fact Sean's father often pointed out. The piece now molded in the basement. Bored, Sean wandered into the hallway where Sojourner just finished the first cut to the puzzle. It was all finishing touches from this point on. She pushed goggles up on her forehead and slipped work gloves off to pick at some of the rougher edges. "Hello, my prince." Sean stifled a cringe. "Hi, Mom." Sojourner had called him her prince all his life. He was used to it. Others were not. as had become obvious when a camp counselor took a knee to read the opening lines of a postcard at summer camp. "Help me clean up? I'll dust if you grab the broom." Sean nodded and set to work with broom and dustpan. Sawing inside the apartment could be too messy if carried on for too long. The basement was too cold for woodwork at the moment, so it meant frequent breaks for cleanup. Sojourner dusted the various sculptures, books, and knickknacks on shelves lining the hall. "Hey, Mom, you remember reading all those comics to me when I was a kid?" Sean's mother had been the center of his life for all his years. She'd always seemed impossibly long in both imagination and form. Long fingers and neck, a long smile on a thin face, like the one she flashed just now before answering. "Of course I do. Why do you ask?" "I was just looking at them." Was all she said in response. After dusting a few more shelves, she said, "They always reminded me of the people I grew up with. Fantastic, impossible, larger than life itself." Sean nodded. He knew the story. She told it 100 times. "I never knew it, though. It was always so normal to me until we found Earth." Sean asked, What do you mean?" Sojourner sighed and swiped up some wood sawdust. "That we were fantastic, but in different ways. Compared to humanity, I understood that. Disappointing in different ways, too, but in one crucial way the same." She'd stopped cleaning and stood fingering the pendant around her neck, an intricate gold piece with a dark amber stone set in the middle. Her thumb made thoughtful circles around it. Sean swept and waited for her to go on. "When change came, it was unruly, violent. My family resisted it. It wasn't until I came here that I truly understood why the people did what they did. This place, this country, the struggle of people who look like us." Sean felt torn. Sojourner never told her story without a distinct edge of melancholy, of loss and wishful thinking. She never told the story this way, but the fine edge of disconsolate memories was still there. He worried about his mother, the moods, the way she'd grown still sometimes and stare into the air at things Sean felt he should be able to see but couldn't. Then Sojourner smiled. Clearly a more positive thought crossed her mind. "It provided clarity for me, but not until after I'd met your father." She dumped sawdust into an empty coffee canister and wiped her hand. Sean grinned back, an awkward flash of emotion. He loved his father for sure. With David Lenon spent most of his time working. It was only in the last few years as Sean got older that he grasped how important that work had been. The reinforced door on the first floor boomed. Sojourner smiled again. Dad was coming in from the cold. That's it for the first part.
That was really good.
Thank you.
So you said it was loosely based on your life. How hard was it? And Christopher Golden recommended to write something about your life. How was that process compared to writing your other books?
It was exceedingly difficult. It's not something I tend to wallow in, but there were these fantastic aspects to some of the things that had happened. So I started to think about that and taking bits and pieces from my life. Like I grew up in Mattapan, which is a small part of Dorchester in Boston. And anybody who knew me back then would recognize some of the aspects of the story, as well as some of the aspects that are assigned to the mother in the story, Sojourner, because my mom used to tell me all the time that she was from Saturn and that she was 1,000 years old. But it was never, the story was never as robust as what's in the book, and certainly things didn't turn out the way they are in the book either. But it's very difficult. Like I think I mentioned to you that this is not something I've ever written before. Like I don't do this type of writing, so I kind of took it as a challenge to do it. It was like pulling my own fingernails out to get through these first couple of chapters.
So you mentioned it was a coming of age story, but it also sounds like it's more like a science fiction.
Absolutely. I can't help but bend towards that. I think most authors of genre work, they kind of get their start reading fantasy, right? It's kind of the most accessible. storytelling and, fairy tales and stuff are sort of built in a fantasy setting. But my first love ended up being science fiction. And that was by way of comic books and superhero stuff, because my mom did read me comics when I was 4 or 5. And I started reading a lot of science fiction. I don't write much of it, but here we are. So I am mixing in some of those elements, but I did want to take a broad look at this fictional family whose parents got together after, whose parents really got together after their membership in a Black liberation group ended. And I enjoy reading about modern history in particular. And, I've been learning more and more about COINTELPRO and what that meant and what their lives might have been like before Sean was born, and how that would affect his present. And, these stories that his mother tells add the science fiction element. And it's not until not well towards the end, but things get weirder as the story progresses.
You have another book called Lightning Wears a Red Cape. So it's kind of dark, listed as dark fantasy and science fiction. Is that different from this forthcoming book, or kind of along the same lines?
Tremendously. Where Blood for the Sun and All the Dead Men is essentially werewolves and vampires, right? It's riffing on those types of legends and sort of squarely in the urban fantasy genre. I hate that name, urban fantasy. It's more like horror thrillers because they're dark. I'd also had this idea. I'd always been, since I'd read comics all my life, I'd always imagined stories and characters and things like that. And I think I was 12 or 13 years old when I realized that all the characters that I had created, in my head or drawn or whatever, were all men. They were all men. They were all white males. And the origins of Lightning Wears a Red Cape are in my undoing that subconscious drive to do that, to just sort of repeat what I had been seeing. And I wanted to see more people like me from places that I'm familiar with. And as I matured, I also wanted to explore, this idea, like DC Comics is really good for this, where superheroes go out, they'll patrol the city for crime. And I'm like, if you went out in a city one night, just drove around, you really wouldn't find much crime. Like it seems completely insane that you'll just drop out of the sky into an alley and prevent a robbery or something like that. I also wanted to explore the idea of people who maybe have abilities and don't want to fight crime, for Christ's sake. Maybe there's other things that they'd like to do. And as well as the civil rights aspect. You don't stop being a citizen if you can do something extraordinary. So there's the sort of political scramble to figure out what to do about that. So that book has all those types of elements in it. I also just have a dark streak. So it's sort of dark and pulpy. There's plenty of adventure in it, but I try to make it as realistic as possible, and throw in a very broken African god in the middle of it and let it
go. Paul McNamee says Errick is really the Marvel superhero, son of Saturn.
Okay. I'm not going to fight crime.
And Tony Tremblay is asking, though, how come Lightning, I didn't realize that was the name of the character, but how come Lightning never wears a red cape in the book? Can you explain the title?
There's only one character who wears a cape, and that's this African god Shango. And he wears a red cape for a particular reason. Like it's an aspect of the Yoruba religion, the color in particular. And it was also that character Shango is sort of analogous to the character of Thor in Norse legend as the god of thunder and lightning and justice. So that's a nod to two things. the Yoruba religion, as well as, my mom read a bunch of Thor comics to me when I was a kid. So he wears a cape. There's one person wearing a cape.
So when you talk about the Norse gods and everything, did that all come from putting it in your book? Did it all come from the comic books you read, or did you go out and do some research on the different myths and legends from different cultures?
Yeah, I very particularly looked at the myths and legends from different cultures because, for the same reason that I'm kind of averse to stories that take place in Victorian times and the Norse legends and things like that. These are all the Greek gods, Roman gods. This is all stuff that's really been shoved at us all our lives. It's pretty much practically like a common, kind of common knowledge. We're taught this stuff in school, at least when it comes to the Greeks and the Romans. But I started to look at the Yoruba religion, as well as Santeria and some of those other aspects. I think I never read it. I did watch the show a little bit, but Neil Gaiman's with the story of American Gods, he plays with these concepts as well, right? Just looking at all the different past gods and the modern ones. So that it was all that type of stuff that I looked into because I was purposely trying to undo what I had been indoctrinated into for most of my life.
So you mentioned that your trilogy, The Blood for Sun and All the Dead Men, there revolves around werewolves, vampires, supernatural. Oh, and John McLevine says Errick is the god of cocktails.
It's true.
What got you interested in the vampires and werewolf genre?
I think that's creature double feature. There's, that was like the first place that I saw Frankenstein and Dracula and the werewolf, and then the movies where 2 or 3 of them were together, and I always really enjoyed the werewolf, the Wolfman, and every time I read or saw a movie about werewolves, in particular, it was about the wild nature of humanity, right? You just lose control when there's a full moon or for some other reason, you do horrible things, you hurt your family and stuff like that. And I kept wondering, like, what would it be like if you didn't lose control? And I think it was Werewolf by Night, the Jack Russell werewolf character, and that eventually masters his wolf, and that's when his life takes a turn because that's when he starts to get involved with other wolfly characters. So I guess carried that with myself a long time, and I like vampires, but I was so done with them. There's so many different takes on it, and I always thought of vampires as particularly horrible type of, I'm not human anymore and I'm driven by this sick urge to drink blood, and and I wanted to write something that was sort of crime fiction driven, horrific, thrilling, that had a shapeshifter, a werewolf, as that primary character. And I also looked more to the Native American legends of skinwalkers and shapeshifters and stuff like that, where it's not necessarily something that's malevolent. And then just created my own, did my own take on it. So I either explain where the myths came from, or I dismiss them entirely. And that's it. I really want to write a crime novel with werewolves and vampires and such in it.
Have you ever read or heard of Laurel K. Hamilton and her Anita Blake books?
I love those books.
You do.
I did. I read the first several, and then I tried to keep up with it. And she kind of took a turn to erotica. So it was like, I don't have a problem with erotica. In fact, I enjoyed her Mary Gentry series, which tackled that head on from go. But taking Anita Blake from where she was to suddenly being erotica just didn't work for me. Like, it felt like the character, it wasn't true to the character. She's so stubborn at one point in the stories that she kills herself to stop someone. And I'm like, that's not somebody who's going to give in to this whole thing and start having, group sex and stuff.
I completely agree. I love the first probably 5 or 6, 7 books until it started taking that turn. And shortly after those next few sets of books, I could see a lot of her fans saying, "What happened? Where are you going with this? Get back to the other." And then it seemed to kind of go back that way, but it wasn't, I don't think, as good as at least the first, say, 3 or 4 or even 5, when then it started to lose that crime. And I understand the connection that she had to make, but the whole thing was she went to solve crimes and mysteries and murders and stuff using her powers. And but she got wrapped up into this whole triumvirate with all the werewolves and vampires. So
everything got kind of thrown out the window. And there's a bunch of other series that I enjoyed. And Jesus Christ, I'm not good at this of just rattling off authors, but like the Hollow series, I forget her name who wrote the books, but they were excellent. Lilith St. Croix, am I getting that right?
I'm not sure.
Well, she wrote a series of novels that were, in this realm as well. It's mostly women that have driven the genre, and I've enjoyed as many of them as I can, or as I could. And I was very excited to try to write something within that. So I was inspired by all that stuff as well to get going.
What's your take on sparkly vampires, like in Twilight and the teen angst? And I'm a traditionalist. I like the dark. I don't mind the romance, because I think, like Interview with a Vampire, I think that sort of romanticism of the vampire and the immortality, I like that aspect, but I also like the dark side of it. But when you throw sparkles and Walking in the Sunlight, that just doesn't work for me.
Well, I agree with that. And this question comes up a lot, or this subject comes up a lot. And my answer to that is, what Twilight was, a very angsty love story about 2 teens. I don't have a problem with that. Vampires and whales and stuff don't exist. So sparkly vampires, I don't have a problem with that. Do whatever you like. A lot of people love that series. It's not for me. I would never write them necessarily that powerful, or that it just would never cross my mind to take someone who's 300 years old and be interested in a teenager for the right reasons. But a lot of people dug it.
I will agree. I read it just out of curiosity. I did kind of like the original, the first Twilight one, but I thought she was kind of a whiny brat, and so that kind of turned me off. But I'd be interested. The new one just came out a little while ago, the Midnight Sun. So it's sort of Twilight, but through what's his name's eyes there. I just lost the main vampire character there.
Jacob? Oh, not Jacob, but the other guy.
Yeah,
I don't know. Leonard, Mike, whatever. So it's a retelling of the story from his perspective, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. I gotta say that's amazing, right? So, bless her heart, she is killing it, right? She's getting paid, and if revisiting it in this way is gonna do that, more power to her.
More power to you, right. So who is your all-time favorite portrayer of Dracula or vampire? What's your favorite vampire movie or book?
I have really enjoyed, I enjoyed the original, Bram Stoker's, even though it's that Victorian style, it's a bit slow. The ideas behind Dracula, I really enjoyed. So, but that's an easy answer to the question. I've always enjoyed movies that depict vampires as particularly horrible. So, movies and books. So, Salem's Lot. I'm blanking on Daywalkers. I'm blanking on the name of a movie that instead of a zombie apocalypse, they have a vampire apocalypse. And it's a guy he takes on a ward and they travel somewhere. Man, I just can't remember the name of it, but the vampires in that were particularly horrible. You know, they're I Am Legend, the book, the original couple of movies. I really enjoyed that because I think that was one of the first times that I saw vampires not only reimagined, but depicted with nuance. Like they had actual motivations and lives. And the protagonist at some point in the story is a little tarnished because of the way he treats them and the way they respond to him. So that was interesting. But yeah, I think the darker side of things I prefer. I'd be hard pressed to throw a favorite out there. And for me, I feel like saying Blade would be a cop out, but I love Blade. Like I love that reinterpretation of it with the Wesley Snipes movie. You know, I'm familiar with the Tomb of Dracula and the character from there, but yeah, that's a better Blade.
What about classic other monster stories like Frankenstein or Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde?
I enjoyed both. Like I read the original stories, and I enjoyed them at the time. They're not things that I pick up and necessarily reread. The thing that I miss about Frankenstein in all the reinterpretations of it is the humanity of the character and how I wouldn't describe it as self-hatred, but he starts out broken. So Dr. Frankenstein creates a broken human. All right, he takes someone builds in all the trauma and abandons it, which, you know, he's the villain. And then Frankenstein becomes the villain. And then the doctor chases them for all that time. But what I miss is there's an arc where Frankenstein's monster, I think he's referenced as Adam somewhere along the way, essentially discovers himself, his self. Like he starts to see himself and learn on his own. He's very resentful of the doctor, but there is an arc where he becomes an irredeemable character. And I love an irredeemable character because no matter what they do, they'll never erase the things that they've done before, because he very purposely kills people in the last act of that book. But he is also very self-aware of his acts. I think there was a comic called Doc Frankenstein, and I think it was by Steve Scrooge. And to me, that felt like the proper evolution of that character. If he's lived that long, he's nigh indestructible. He becomes extremely intelligent. But no matter what, he's never going to be redeemed because he can't change his past.
Right. You may be glad to know that, and I had mentioned this at another point or another interview. There is a new Dracula graphic novel coming out. Actually, it came out in November, just after Halloween, of course. But it's the only authorized use of Bela Lugosi's image as
Really?
Dracula. Yeah. I was hoping to get it for the store. Haven't had a chance to. We would do, because we're trying to put the classics, normal regular novels, there's like 100 and almost 170 sanctioned graphic novels. And so I'm trying to get those. As I get new ones, I try to pair it with the graphic novels. We have a few, but that's definitely one that I'd like to get, because I like Bela Lugosi. It's a classic. And
yeah.
So
That's a cool idea.
One of the other, I was trying to think of another vampire and werewolf, weird animal pairing in a movie. Underworld. What do you think of the Underworld series?
I love those. I love the action of those movies. The first one I thought was really entertaining. The series kind of peters out as it goes, as it explores the mythos and all that stuff. But the world they set up in the beginning, I was really enamored with in terms of the action, and that's the type of action that I try to bring to the Alexander Smith series, because they use guns and modern techniques of fighting, just ramped up to 11.
So would you consider Selene, the main character, sort of an anti-hero, or like a superhero?
I would consider her, like I just said, an irredeemable character.
Yeah.
You know, she towed the line, and she did a lot of things that maybe she should have done, but you know, it doesn't matter if she realizes that it's too late. She'll never be able to undo it. She's sort of stuck.
So let's go back to well, actually, I have one question here from John Goodrich. Did I hear you say Bracken nagged you into this? And I'm assuming he means the Queen of Saturn. And I said, would Bracken really do that?
Yeah, aggressively. It was aggressively nagged. I would share some of the texts and other communiques that were sent about this. But I'm not into tarnishing people's reputations like that. Not that his reputation could be any further tarnished.
So with the other new one, part of the trilogy, the Headless Woman, how does that continue the story with the vampires and the weir animals?
Well, it's going to be set in the first two books are set in Boston. So the first one starts with Alexander not remembering why he's in Boston, right? So he has this memory issue, and there you go. He doesn't know why he's in Boston, gets tangled up in this adventure, and it is by the end of the second book that he remembers where he was going. So the third one is going to take place in another city, and you know, how much to give away? It should take place in New Orleans. I got a lot of research to do. That's going to be a city that he hates, and part of the reason he hates it is because it's kind of a nexus of magic. And, you know, if you're a supernatural creature, you're going to have a headache there all the time. But I'll get to play with voodoo and other supernatural type people and how they exist. There'll be a hotel run by ghouls. There's a fight between two different forms of magic. So two criminal kingpins are going at it, and Alexander's kind of in the middle of that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to actually. I have a full outline for it. I just need to write the whole thing out. I just need to make that happen.
As soon as you said New Orleans and vampires, my first thought was voodoo. How much did you incorporate that, or are going to incorporate that in the book, and how much research did you have to do to portray it?
I've done. It's hard. I have found it difficult to do research into voodoo because it's been, you know, ever since was the Lair of the White Worm. It was like the first time that zombies were. It might not be the first time. I think it was the first time I ever saw zombies depicted from their source like that. And, you know, voodoo became more popularized. And if you visit New Orleans, you can go, White Zombie, thank you, John. You can go, when you go to New Orleans, you can visit all kinds of offshoots of things that follow it, but it seems a little, you know, I need to find more scholarly takes on voodoo before I can do certain parts of the book, because it's not so much that I want to be, I don't mind being wildly inaccurate if I came up with it, but I don't want it to be something that's stuck in my head from, you know, other things that have been depicted before. So that's something I really have to look into.
What's your take on zombies? Are you a fan of zombie type stuff? Is that something you're going to work into another book, or?
I believe that everybody has one zombie story in them, just one, at least one, and that every zombie story should not be about the zombies. The zombies are just the existential threat out there, and I think so I don't mind zombies as long as you're telling a story about people and not the shambling monstrosities out there. Who cares about them? They stumble into you and you die. That's the threat. They're not the story.
Over on Facebook, we've got GD Dearborn is asking, is Lycanthrope Bastards in the same universe as the Alexander Smith books?
We're not taking questions from GD. No, it's not. Let's see. That's a standalone. I don't know where that came from necessarily. I like the idea of writing a story with a comedian as the central character, a horror story with a comedian as the central character.
Have you thought about turning any of your books? So you love comic books, and to ever think about turning them into a comic book?
I would. I would. I have not had the opportunity to do anything like that, and I'm not trying to do anything in particular like that. In fact, Alexander Smith, part of his genesis was when I was in college. I went to the Massachusetts College of Art, and there was a publication in the school called 43, and every other semester they would publish a book of comics. And the 2 times that I submitted to it, they misprinted what I gave them. But the first thing I submitted was 4 or 5 painted pages of Alexander Smith's story. And it's kind of the origin story of his daughter, his adopted daughter, and her grandsire. So that's where those 3 characters came from in the first place. I've just been banging around my head since then.
So you say you're a graphic designer by trade, or you're a graphic designer, and would you, if you ever did do a comic books, would you be the artist, or would you collaborate with somebody, or just or somebody else who works in that genre as a trade?
I would absolutely collaborate with somebody. I started out a pretty good illustrator, but I didn't stick with it. And you must stick with things if you want to get any better at them. You have to work at it. I have not. So absolutely, that would be for somebody else. But I'm so intimate with the process, and I can typeset and design books and things like that. It's not too hard for me to direct somebody to do these types of things. I don't think I would be a nightmare to work with with an illustrator, but we'll see, should that opportunity arise one day. I have written some comic strips, but I haven't done anything with them yet.
So what do you do design?
Mostly print and electronic imagery. So there's a lot, the world we live in now, especially now, we're communicating more and more electronically. So it's become very much needing to understand formats and dimensions and use. So I have designed all kinds of print things, and I have designed all kinds of electronic things, but I'm not a coder, so I haven't created apps and things like that. But I've made plenty of stuff for social media and to work inside apps.
Now, from art school, has there anything that your art has been in? Have you done shows? Are they in books? Are they in just on your website?
Yeah, well, if you can go to my website to see things that I have drawn, or the actual art that I've done is not on my website, but there's some comic stuff there. I got a commission to do comic strips for a book that someone had written about religious humor. So not humor about religion, but how humor has manifested in the major religion. So I did a series of 1-panel cartoons for that. That's on the website. I've done cartoon characters for some campaigns, for nonprofit campaigns. I did a portrait and interview of Mel King. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Mel King out there, but he was an important figure in Boston. I interviewed him when he was 70-something, this is several years ago. And I made a portrait out of layered cut paper, and I took the interview and I turned it into a comic strip, and that was hung in City Hall along with 99 other subjects. So they had a 100-year portrait project. I've painted things, done some charcoal work, but it's not the main thrust of my day-to-day anymore. Yeah,
my daughter's in her second semester, starting in January, second semester at Montserrat College of Art, there in Beverly, and mainly for sculpture and photography. But she had her first taste last year, her freshman year, in charcoal. She's never done that before, and she absolutely loved it. So when you mentioned charcoal there, and different perspectives, the one there, that one piece of art where the stairs are going in different directions and upside down. She did something similar. Yeah, something similar to that, and it was just fantastic. So that's her third.
My oldest daughter is really into art, and she's 16. She's better than I am. She's better than I ever was, already. So, when you start young and stick with it.
Tony says he has a T-shirt that you designed.
Yes, I have designed several T-shirts. I enjoy designing T-shirts. I have a T-shop on Threadless, redrobot.threadless.com, and I don't know. I think that's what attracted me to graphic arts is creating interesting things that exist, not just electronic. So I always liked T-shirts and calendars and magazines, and these are all things that I don't get to work on too often because I'm either working or writing in my spare time or trying to participate in family life.
Yeah. So behind you on the wall there, looks like there's something with like a snake or a. Is that something you designed, or a dragon? Is that something you designed?
No, that's my certificate of black belt from the Rockstar Martial Arts program. So that's what says I'm a black belt in Krav Maga.
Oh, congratulations. My son's a black belt in Taekwondo.
That's a photo of the crew. There's several people in there that would, practically made a living punching me in the face. It was great.
Yeah. Yeah, my son did quite a few years in Taekwondo, and he's a first-degree black belt in Taekwondo. So you mentioned you do outlines. Last night, we had Kat Scully on, and she's also an artist, and she mentioned that she does outlines, but she also sometimes she does storyboards of what of what's in her head. Have you ever done, as an artist, a storyboard to help you along with your process?
Not for writing. No. It's something you kind of have to do if you're doing any video projects or if you're doing a comic book. When I was doing comic strips, it's only 3 or 4 panels, and it would take like a half hour to come up with a script, come up with the funny, and then like 2 hours to actually draw the comic strip and then ink it and color it and all that stuff. So rarely would I do, I would do thumbnails, but not storyboards. No, I know Kat does a lot of motion work in the game industry and stuff. So
I know must be difficult just to begin with, just to write a novel, even a short story. I tried my hand at that NaNoWriMo last year, and I was able to get maybe 38 words, and then I called it a day on that. But to go from a novel down to comic books, Kat and I talked about this last night, is a difficult thing. How much more difficult is it going from, say, a comic book to just a 3 or 4 panel comic strip to get a whole story across?
Yeah, it is a completely different world. It's, a script, a novel, a short story, a comic strip. So not only, I read any comic that I could find, right? So not only just comic books, but comic strips, right? I was always had my nose in the newspaper. I would even read the unfunny stuff in the editorials. In fact, the unfunny stuff in the sports pages, like Tank McNamara and a couple of other strips back there. Editorials, which half the time I didn't even understand what they were. And I think I just got a really sharp understanding of how a comic strip worked. And I love humor. I've watched a lot of stand-up. I enjoy a lot of different kinds of comedy. And coming up with 3 or 4 panel gags just kind of really comes naturally. So it's so much easier than writing a short story or a novel or even a comic script, like 32 pages or 28 pages of panel after panel after panel. But the 3 or 4 panel format, take.
I never realized till recently that well, you grew up in the 70s. I grew up in the 70s, so I watched a lot of like Bugs Bunny, Tom and Jerry, all those Hanna-Barbera cartoons that were only, and I never really realized it, were only maybe 5 or 8 minutes long.
Yeah.
So it kind of, the way I see it, a novel is like a full Disney movie, and then you've got your comic book, which is like now a SpongeBob SquarePants, which is at least 10 to 15 minutes long to get a whole story across.
Yeah.
But how incredibly talented somebody really has to be in order to do a 5 minute Bugs Bunny or Woody Woodpecker cartoon and get the entire thing across in just 5 or 7 minutes, like you do with a comic strip. Jim Davis, Charles Schultz, the one, I can't think of the one who writes Calvin and Hobbes, but all those people,
Bill Watterson.
yeah, just 3 or 4, maybe 5 at the most panels, and get a whole story plus the comic side across.
Yeah, I swear, writing these things, because they're so visual, often, well, especially something like a Bugs Bunny cartoon or any cartoon. There's so many visual gags in there. You're relying so much on the artists and the animators to convey a certain emotion and motion and things like that. But writing them, I don't know. It's more fun and faster to write these things because they're light and you don't have to delve in it. I don't care who SpongeBob's parents were, or what his childhood was like, or what relatives he has, or his relationship with any former romantic relationships, and what his damage is. No, SpongeBob exists in the moment, and that's fun. That's very freeing. Like writing characters like that is very freeing. When I was doing Lost in Transition, which I started to repost on Instagram, I had developed sort of a world for these characters to exist in. A guy, he loses his job, and he had allowed his job to define him all his life, and to make ends meet, because he doesn't have a ton of financial responsibility, he becomes a nanny for his best friend's kid. His best friend has his own business. He's an entrepreneur, and his wife works sort of at a high level at a not a legal firm. I'm losing the thread of what that is. But anyway, once that's created, the sky's the limit. Death is a central character in the story. There's sentient giant spiders and raccoons, all kind of crazy things. You can do whatever you want. Right. That makes it so much easier if you're just trying to nail something that's funny or entertaining than something that's emotionally real or is what's the word that lets you believe a man can fly type of thing. You don't have to worry about that stuff when you're doing that.
Have you ever thought about doing something like some sort of comic novel, like Douglas Adams or Terry Pratchett, something sci-fi and stuff, but just incredibly weird and off the wall, laugh out loud as you're reading it, funny?
No, no, I haven't. I haven't been able to. I can't. I've enjoyed some of that stuff. What's his name? Aspen when I was growing up, and shit, I'm forgetting his last name, but Craig, we share a birthday. He writes this kind of funny stuff. I can't do it. I don't think I've ever been able to reliably write funny prose. Craig Shaw Gardner. Yeah. Thank you, John.
And
thank you, Mike.
Bracken McLeod says it's because you're not funny.
He's not funny.
So amongst being a writer and a graphic designer, you're also, I have here, co-editor of fanzine Journey Planet. What is a fanzine?
Well, Journey Planet is a fanzine. That basically means that it's a publication that's put together by fans, and it's free. It's It's really for love of the genre that this thing comes together. And Journey Planet is arranged around two editors, James Bacon and Christopher Garcia, and they always bring on a couple of co-editors. So they have created a universe of co-editors over the years. And a few years ago, they won a Hugo in the fanzine category. So they're very passionate about what they do. And each issue has a theme. And several months ago, I had suggested the future of policing as the theme. I was like, oh man, this cops everywhere in spec fiction. Like you could do a whole issue on this, amongst a number of other things. And then it came back up in another meeting where at this point the pandemic had really just started, and the police had killed George Floyd, and there's nothing good that will come of this, but it seemed like George Floyd was a tipping point for not only this country but the world. So it created a cascading effect. So it became a thing that people had thoughts about. And it was really cool to help put together this issue, to solicit these essays. So it's 69 pages, totally free. journeyplanet.weebly.com. I got to design the issue. I love designing magazines, and I tried to bring everything I could to it to make it, a nice, tight, professional look. Erin has editing experience. I have writing experience, and we went through, and it covers everything from like really serious analysis of the situation, all the way to just being a fan of some of these properties. And there's a particular emphasis on Watchmen in the book. And we got some great names in there, and some great art. Afua Richardson, who's kind of a polyglot creative. I mean, she's an illustrator. She paints, she writes, she sings, she does all these things. Some of her artwork's on the cover. Chris Golden, Brendan Wasser, Brendan Dubois, Kenesha Williams, Bracken McLeod, Gerald Coleman, Tobias Reckerman, Helena Nash, Brian Talbot's a UK artist. He's working on something called The Legend of Luther Arkwright. He donated a comic panel. And there was so much work in there, and it's so interesting. And you can read these things as just a fan, because you like nerding out about some of these properties, and you can take away something interesting from all of these articles, because they're all of them are very personal. Brendan Dubois' piece is how some of Philip K. Dick and Robert Heinlein's early work altered his thinking as a 12-year-old, his perception of police and justice systems. And Bracken McLeod's and Gerald Coleman's pieces and Chris Golden's pieces are very serious look at the current state of policing and drawing parallels to the fiction that we enjoy. It's safe to enjoy this entertainment, but in reality, this stuff really doesn't work out. And there's also a section in the book, at the back of the book, called Instant Fanzine, where if people wanted to contribute something, but they didn't have time or they couldn't think of anything for an essay, there's a series of questions. And there was a set of questions about the HBO's Watchmen TV show, and a series of questions about the subject of the future of policing. And you could just fill that in. We got some great names back there: Angel Louis Colon, Michelle Lane, Jeanette Ng. So it's a great issue. It's a great big issue, and I was really proud to have worked on it. I'm really proud of the results of it. It was a heck of a team effort.
Now, is this an online thing, or is it print, or is it both?
Yeah, it's just online. Like I said, it's just fans putting something together. So nobody there's no budget to put against this. It's not for sale. It's just for the love of genre. And every now and then, I don't work on Journey Planet all the time. I'm a guest guest co-editor for this particular issue, but this is one where we get to take a very real life situation and look at it through the lens of speculative fiction as fans, because and we have professional authors and just fans writing stuff for it. So it's very timely.
Do you have you ever done a podcast? Have you ever thought about doing a podcast? I know you have a blog on your website.
Considering how often I write blog posts, I should not have a podcast.
Fair enough.
I can only muster so much.
So let's talk a little bit about your writing process. You had mentioned, we had both mentioned that you do outlines. It's amazing when I started this whole thing way back in the summer, how different everybody is and how they approach, how they write a book. Some do the outlines. I learned a new word, pantsers. Some people, a combination. Last night, Kat Scully there, she does storyboards, but she also does outlines. Sometimes she puts them together. She uses this program, I guess, called Scrivener. I've only heard that twice in the whole series that we've been doing. How do you approach when you have an idea? How do you approach getting started?
When I have an idea, the first thing I do is write it down. There may be a little panting right from the beginning where like maybe the first few paragraphs of the first chapter, but I need to figure out where I'm going in order to get there. I have an opinion on pantsers, and I'll tell you in a minute, but I do use Scrivener, and the thing that I like about Scrivener is that there's a view in the app that lets you do the old index card method, and you can create an outline by creating a summary of each chapter. And I know each chapter is going to be approximately 5,000 words, and X amount of chapters is going to give you a novel. And then you got to just write all the stuff in between. But I feel like you really have to know where you're going. And when you've got a pantser, I feel like pantsing is meandering. It's life. Life doesn't find the resolution. It just goes on and on and on and on. And you end up with Game of Thrones. But it worked out for him.
So when you got your somebody just drove up. When you got everything kind of set and you're going, have you ever meandered? Have you ever just, you have your outline, you starting to put things together through Scrivener, but just say, you know what, let's kind of go off on this little tangent and see where it goes?
Well, yeah, some of that happens. Like there, of course, is some evolution. Yeah, Tom Detty, he's wandering out in the wilderness somewhere. Yeah, I see you, Tom. You have these points where things evolve, but that doesn't change the end point, right? You can go all over the place in between, but I know where this thing is going. If I don't know where it's going, if I don't know how this ends, it's never going to end. So I tend not to outline short stories, just a few points. But a novel, I absolutely have to do that. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm doing.
Do you make an outline for your characters as far as what they're going to be, what they're going to do, and then fit that in? Or do you kind of just let that evolve as you go?
Well, what I do for characters, and this is another great thing about Scrivener, there's a whole section where I can keep character profiles, and they evolve, but they start from somewhere. Each character I'll have a character sheet for each character, and I'll know who they are, what some of their motivations are, the things they like, don't like, what they look like, even minor characters. And this helps you keep track of everybody. I can't remember, like the book I'm writing now is the main character, and he has these 4 friends, and the universe between him and his 4 friends is much broader than with his own family, because it's just his mother and father. But these 4 friends, they have parents, they have siblings, they live in different parts of the city, they've had experiences together, and keeping track of all that in my head is impossible. that affects all of their interactions. So, and plus, remembering all their names
Right.
gets a little difficult, because if I'll start off with these people, but if they're not featured, for several chapters, I'm like, what's that kid's name again? And I can just easily look it up. I feel like it's really important to have all this stuff. I don't know how people who pants keep track of all this stuff.
We have one, Steve Ann Sampson on Facebook says Tom Dady could use a good pantsing.
I'm not a king. I won't shame anybody for their kinks. Have at it, guys.
And then over here, Bracken McLeod says, well, I'm going to paraphrase. Oh yeah, outlines.
Yeah.
I know
He's
Kat
working
Scully
on
had,
it.
yeah, well, Kat Scully mentioned him last night, that's where she got her philosophy of using, I guess, outlines from. Michael Burke, official handbook of the Marvel Universe style entries.
Not since I was a teenager.
So once you got, well, have you ever taken, so characters, when you're developing a character, is it purely from scratch, or do you kind of sometimes take, other than the new book that's sort of based on your life, your other books, take characteristics from friends, family, either very subtly, or sure, you probably put a little bit of that into, but can somebody read the book and say, hey, that's me?
Yeah. There's a couple of points. Okay, so myself and 4 or 5 other people have been in a writing group together for several years, and we haven't been able to meet for a long time, but for a minute there was we were killing each other in our stories. So there was a highly recognizable character in the story. And recently I've stopped killing them and started including them in different ways. But the short answer to that question is yes. So there are characters that are based on real people, but they're never the main characters. So that's a little too obvious, a little too on the nose. Maybe to have a little bit of fun, or to not kill too much time trying to think of this sort of secondary character. But aspects of people, if there's someone that you've met years ago that just annoyed you to no end, and you need to add an annoying characteristic, why not? Would that person recognize that particular aspect of themselves in there? Probably not. But there is a lot of inspiration from real people in real situations. And you also got to remember that I don't know what's going on inside someone's head when they do what they do, right? I only have what they did, and that might inspire like how I imagine their motivations to be.
Right.
Considering how horrible some of this stuff can be, I hope I'm not right, but yeah, there's lots of real world inspiration, it's just everywhere for the picking.
Has anyone who has read your book, be it as a beta reader, we'll get to that in a minute, or a finished work, friend or family or coworker, whatever, say, dude, why'd you kill me off that way?
A couple times. Yeah. A couple friends are like, man, that was horrible. Like, what was that for? But like I said, I kind of stopped doing that, and I included, so it's no secret that I'm pretty good friends with Bracken. He'll deny this, but we're pretty good friends. And he's in All the Dead Men, and he's in Blood for the Sun. And in All the Dead Men, it's because of the name, right? It's an unusual name, right? You can't shake that. It's just an unusual name, and I needed that for a particular character. And that's pretty much, I snagged the name, I gave him some cursory physical characteristics, and then just went total fantasy from there. So the only person that's really gonna catch that is either Bracken or people that know him. In Lightning Wears the Red Cape, he's a minor character in the role of a prosecutor, which is one of his former professions, as well as some eccentricities. So that was more of an homage. There was nothing insulting in that particular one. In Lightning Wizard Red Cape, that one is entirely his fault.
So kind of going back to the research aspect of writing, have you ever, and you also mentioned writing groups, have you ever wanted to add something that you really don't have a lot of expertise in, you don't really want to do a lot of research on, but you do know somebody, you have a friend, say Bracken or Tony Tremblay or somebody in another writing group that has expertise in a particular thing, and going to say, hey, can you give me a quick synopsis of how I could write this in, or tell me about this? Case in point, we're going to have another writer, Al Leverone. It's a good friend of mine, and I used to work with him at another job, and he doesn't know a lot about guns, but we work with somebody who is a shooter, and so he went to him for advice on different technical aspects of gun and gun ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll use the example there in the audience here, John Goodrich. He's got quite a deep set of knowledge about both Cthulhu related stuff, so the cosmic horror stuff, as well as kaiju, giant monster things. And there's more than 2, 3 occasions that I've gone to him in particular, like, hey, can you explain to me, about some of this stuff, or what type of aspect of this would reflect this thing that I'm trying to do, or what do you know about X, Y, Z, or can you point me in the direction of? So yeah, that type of thing happens all the time. I should say that type of thing should happen all the time, or you'll get these weird, even though we're making all this stuff up, right? What I was talking, just the example I was just using doesn't really exist. Like, there's the mythos for these things, but it's not real, so it can be reinvented whenever you want. But you have to be careful, not only with things like that are established mythos, but things in reality, like you mentioned, guns or other mechanical processes. If you just shoot from the hip with that stuff, you'll come up with something, or you'll gloss something over that will drive your story to a grinding halt for a whole bunch of people who know better. So for tons of former lawyers and people who have legal backgrounds, and if you do something completely out of hand in a courtroom, or a legal process or something, that the story grinds to a halt for them. The amount of people that are interested and know about guns, and you do something completely stupid with that, it kills the story for them, and you don't want that.
Has that ever happened to you with any of your stories, or you write a lot of short stories too? Has that ever happened with any of those?
I haven't heard. If I have, I try it. If I'm up against something that I don't know, I just go around it. If it's not integral to the story, then just go around it. Don't try to make it up. Like, you can gloss over all kinds of things, like space travel. Like, yes, there's all kinds of established processes for going into space, but Star Trek, there is nothing there grounded very much in the reality that we exist in. But so you can do it. You just got to be a little careful about it.
So on that line, where if there's something you come across, you say, it's not necessary for the plot or for the story, just get rid of it. Have you ever done that with a character? And have you ever gotten so engrossed in the character, but then just all of a sudden come to a dead end and say, you know what, this is just not going to work with this character, and have to go all the way back and fix or retool the beginning of that?
I don't think so. I don't recall anything like that. I don't recall doing anything like that, because I don't just wing it through a story necessarily. I won't end up with a cast of 1,000 characters with 100 of them that I've forgotten about, or some aspects that that I haven't caught before the story was published. And also, if you have, if you're submitting to places and you get a good editor and they like your story, they'll help you with that. They'll say, well, you said this person, likes sandwiches here, and then, 1,000 words later they hate sandwiches. They'll see that and help you with it rather than just reject you or ridicule you. Everybody should have an interest in getting this thing to print without
Right.
any weird glaring errors like that. But no, I've never had to just retcon a character out of a story or just toss somebody or write around them, thankfully.
So you mentioned you've been part of writing groups. How important is that? Have you ever been on like writers retreats or anything like that, or conventions?
Yeah, yeah, several conventions. I sold my first book at a convention that is now defunct, and I miss it. But it was literally an elevator pitch. Like, I had met some of the principals in the dealer room, and I happened to get on the elevator with one of them. I didn't really understand what her role was with the publisher, and she asked me, "What do you got?" And I had developed an elevator pitch, and I gave it. And she's like, "You know what? I want you to send that to me." So you kind of never know when that's going to happen. So conventions, I think, are good for meeting lots of industry personnel. And I also think it's important to go to things like that to demonstrate that you're not insane. There's, all professions draw all kinds of people, but it's very difficult to just take cold submissions where you could end up with anything. And you don't want to get entangled with somebody that gives you that vibe. So cons are really good for developing some of those relationships.
Right.
Writing groups, I think, are great, especially when you start out. The writing group that I was a part of, we all started selling stories at about the same time. And once we were all busy enough is when, we kind of started to go our separate ways and started to work at different paces. But I really feel like we help each other get started. And I feel like that's very important. Other people, I'd like to have the time to do the writing group thing more often. And a lot of people need that kind of support to dig through it. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It depends on the person, but I do think it's very important for getting started. You need that support.
Did you find that your writing grew the more you were involved with writing groups?
Yes. Yeah, because I think what happens is it helps to motivate people to have a reason and to not be alone. Right? I'm not just writing in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. I'm writing for a purpose. Like, I need to have this done by such and such a date. This is good practice, I think, for later on. If you get invited to an anthology or you see a submission period that's coming up and with a theme that you'd be interested in, or even if you predict something that's coming in the cycles of publishing for novels, you can, when you look back, you can see how things change, where post-apocalyptic novels were all the rage. If you see something like that coming, then you can have enough focus to hit that mark. So yeah, I think it's important for regular writing.
Have you ever looked back at some of your earlier writings and thought about maybe changing them a little bit, or that is what it is because that's where you were at that point in your writing career?
Until recently, I did have an audio publisher approach me to submit something. And they were like, it can be something you've already had printed, or it can be something, something you've already got, or you can kick some few ideas at us. And I said, well, here's this thing. I have this seems to fit what it is that you do. And they were like, we like this, but in order for it to work in audio, would you be willing to do these types of edits? And that was like the first time that I had revisited a story to make it different, to streamline it, to change certain aspects of the characters, to change this, like, the central conceit. Well, the central conceit didn't change, but the results of it, the catalyst of it changed, and things like that. And I did the work, and I liked it better. Like, I felt like it really refreshed the work. I've never come up with that on my own, but this group looked at it and asked for these things, and I'm always willing to try stuff. I don't mind, as long as you're not rewriting the story according to the way you think things should go, just because that's the way you think things should go. It's important to say no. It's okay to say no sometimes.
Yeah. So how's COVID, besides the obvious you can't meet with the writers group, how has that changed? Have you done virtual meets with people, or you just kind of taken a break from meeting with writer groups?
We've been on a long break from meeting as a writing group. But socially, it's been nice to meet with people. It's been semi-regular weekend meets that some people put together. It has been interesting that I've been able to participate in some online conventions that I would not have been able to participate in otherwise, because I can't just drop $3,000 to get to New Zealand, or a number of different places, or I can't afford to get into this giant convention, but they're willing to reach out and do this online stuff, and they were able to include more people. So I have enjoyed that aspect. Who knows how long that'll go on once the pandemic isn't around anymore. I don't know, but it's been nice to be able to make some of those contacts and talk to some of those people and be on some of those panels and serve in that way.
Yeah, I've asked this question to a few other writers who I knew did mainly around here. They'd go up to like Nowhere, Maine, and do a retreat with a couple other local authors from like Maine or New Hampshire, whatever. And of course that can't happen, but they did say that, but because of that, I got hooked up either through Facebook or some other onlines, and are now talking to people over in California and England and stuff, and learning more from other writers. So I guess there's always a plus and minus to everything.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't want to do a retreat online, because that's not really a retreat.
Right.
There's no way to do that, but it is good to be able to, I think it's good that we've normalized video chatting a little bit more, because it makes it easier for those moments where I think, Tony Tremblay is in here. We hopped into a video chat to talk about a piece of writing for something that he's editing, to straighten it out. And that was great. I feel like pre-pandemic, it would have been a phone call, or we would have tried to meet physically, and that might have taken a while because he's in New Hampshire. But the video chat made it a lot easier to do that sort of thing. Makes it easier to see all of these colleagues, all these friends that are scattered all over the place. We're in the same time zone, but we're just not that close together. So I like that. That's nice.
So you mentioned collaborating and editing together. Do you use beta readers, and are you a beta reader for others?
Yes, yes, and yes. I've beta read a few short stories, one or two novels. Do I use them? Yes. There's a lot of different reasons to use a beta reader. Maybe you just want to, how do you feel about this? Like, did you find it entertaining? I don't need a line read. I don't need all of your comments about my grammar, for instance, or and sometimes you might want someone to beta read something to make sure those factual aspects, like what you brought up earlier, actually work. Did I break the flow anywhere in here, in this thing that you have expertise in, or does it work for that, or can you suggest something? So I think it's very important to have some kind of support writing this stuff. Writing's a lonely pursuit, but it doesn't have to be.
Right. And you mentioned you use an editor too. So do you start with the beta readers to kind of get an overall feel for things, and then bring it to the editor for the technical aspect, the line by line, the punctuation, and all that, or do you kind of just mix it up for both?
Yes, the former. So yes, absolutely. I think an author should do everything they can to get something as tight as possible before turning it over into the full professional process. You're greasing the wheels when you do that.
So you started your trilogies going through Haverhill House Publishing. So we're going to have John McElveen and Christopher Golden on Saturday evening to talk about their publishing industry and their books, of course.
Yeah, it's gonna be a mess.
Yeah, we'll probably schedule 3 hours for that one. But what made you decide to go with a traditional publisher, be it a small press or a traditional publisher, versus going self-publishing?
I did both. Honestly, it's I'm not a fan of self-publishing yet for two reasons. The first one primarily being the hustle required to do that professionally and sell that book. I don't have the time or the motivation to do that. So bless you to everybody who actually pulls that off. Like I don't denigrate self-publishing. I ain't got what it takes to do it. The other reason I think is if you have enough fans and a big enough platform and you self-publish some things, I think that makes more sense if you don't have the time or the motivation to do that hustle, like to make sure you have a professional cover, to have it produced correctly, have it laid out correctly, proofing, editing, all those different things. That's a one-person operation that's making that happen.
Plus all the plus all the marketing. What are some of the things though that because you do have to market yourself though, regardless. Your editors and publishers probably do a lot of that, but there must be some aspect of self-promoting that you do. What are some of the things that you do other than in the past go to conventions and to sell your book?
I'm terrible at it. Like I'm just terrible at it. Like I have enough shit going on in my life that I can't hustle up that network of bloggers and book reviewers and stuff like that. And I don't have a ton of experience with that, but publishers do. Even if they don't have a massive budget for marketing, they should be able to recommend places to approach, or they have a standard list of places that they submit things to. They may not be able to put up billboards on I-95, but they're still able to weasel their way into things, especially as I think of small publishers as a group to get into things. It's essentially what's happening at the end of the series, where the Haverhill House Publishing is coming to do a thing. You've had a number of authors on through here, but yeah, that experience, at least you should be able to lean on. At least I try to when I can muster the motivation and the time. I wish I had 10,000 followers that I could just send a newsletter to, but that's something you got to build over time. I'm not gonna lie, I have been working on that.
One of the one author that we have, I thought this was ingenious when she mentioned it, but she went through a traditional publisher, small time press here in New Hampshire. But when she used to travel, she would bring a few copies of her book with her. And especially if it was at an airport that she had never flown into or out of, she would leave a copy of her book with maybe a little, I think it's like either a bookmark or a postcard with her website address, not address, but website address, and about the book and stuff, and say, here, please have this free copy, and pass it along and write a review. It sounds like you haven't done anything like that, but
I wish I could remember this type of thing. So, for instance, when Lightning Weds Red Cake came out, we had a party to kick it off, and my wife ordered a cake with the book cover on the cake, right? So it never occurred to me that people were being exposed to that, and what that might mean to them. So the cover of Lightning Wears a Red Cape features what is obviously a Black man on it, right? And people have been pushing for, more than a decade to get more non-white characters on the covers of books. All right, so we go to pick up this cake, and they give it to us, and here's this cover, and it's a Black woman who gives me the cake, and it's all Black people working behind the counter. And she was like, "Oh, this is really cool. Is this for some kind of a book thing?" And then of course my wife's like, "Oh, the author's right here." And we get into a conversation, and she's like, "Oh man, I'm in a book club. My husband and I are in a book club, and we're always looking for other authors to read, et cetera, et cetera. I wish I had the foresight to have, have books in my trunk or something like that. Because I would have given them a couple of copies and said, hey, here, check it out. You don't have to go and buy it, just to make it easy, right? To grease those wheels again, to get people to read it and share it and give reviews and stuff like that. So I just don't think like that. I'm usually worried about, I don't know, the electric bill or something like that.
Well, one of the things we like to do is get any kind of swag from anybody to give out with the book. We do have quite a few local authors in the store, and we've had typically bookmarks, business cards. Some have even had pens and pins, little dragon pins. One writer who has a book series about dragons. And one even has a whole pamphlet. It's a historical fiction about a Civil War submarine, and it's a whole pamphlet about it. And so we hand them out with the books, so you learn more about it. But so the cover, is that you?
Oh God, no. I'm just bald. I'm not jacked, and neither do I wear a red cape often.
All right. So we're a little over, but that's fine. We can keep going for a little longer because I know you did want to do another quick reading. Did you want to take some time to do that?
Well, I know we are over.
No, it's perfectly fine. We're not going to get kicked off or anything, but I would like to give you the opportunity to do the second reading.
I would leave that up to the audience. Like if I see enough people that are like, sure, let's stick around to hear the rest of that.
All right.
I will.
Facebook,
people
Zoom,
need to move on.
Audience.
Move on.
Yeah, we do it. Z, go for it. Read it. So
I shouldn't have said anything.
I guess here we go. Yeah, I got Facebook is read, thumbs ups, and a lot of happy faces.
Okay, so this is the second part. It's about 10 minutes. Again, I didn't want to read for like a half hour in one long stretch. So we're going to pick up with the father coming into the apartment from the cold. David entered the apartment, still out of breath to the smiling faces of his family. Strange and beautiful sojourner and the son she'd given him 12 years ago. He began wriggling out of his coat, but stopped to snatch the watch cap off his head. Sojourner glided up and placed both of her palms on David's cheeks and kissed him. Sean felt a burst of embarrassment and wondered why the feeling had come. His parents were almost always affectionate. They sat close on the couch, slow danced in the kitchen, and shared kisses coming and going. Hey, baby, David said, slipping coat and boots off. You're sweating and freezing at the same time, Sojourner said. Let me get some coffee going for you. With that, she headed down the hallway into the kitchen. Sean hugged his father. Ew, your back is wet. Did you get all the snow? David snorted. Hardly, but we can get to the sidewalk on the driveway. Might have gotten further if you hadn't gassed out. He gave Sean a friendly nudge. You good now? Sean rolled his eyes, chewing on a smile. Being perfectly honest with himself, he could still feel the hum of fatigue on his young muscles. As if reading his son's mind, David put one long arm around his boy's shoulders and said, I can see how tired you are, boy. You'll be fine tomorrow. I'm sure you'll be back out there when your stuff's dry. David looked at the mess of creativity in the hall. Sean knew it irked his father to see such disarray. Huh. You helping your mom clean up? Get that sawdust in the can. I'll pick up scraps. They set about their task silently, the only other sounds coming from the kitchen as Sojourner set the percolated pot going. The sawdust can was almost full, Sean noted. His mother used the dust to create a sculpting paste for a kind of fresco effect on paintings. Scraps could become all sorts of things, like the art that hung on the walls. David dropped wood bits into a box that Sojourner would later stash. Then he unplugged and wrapped up the power tools. When he finished, he stood and took in the house silently for a few moments. Sean watched him, curious. I ain't never been home this much before. Sean shrugged. You know you have to work. Indeed I do, David said, not looking at his son. That's one good thing this damn storm brought. He smiled at Sean, and Sean smiled back. Sojourner walked back into the hallway and handed David a steaming mug. Seems like whenever I am here, I'm cleaning up after your mother. Sojourner poked David and said, well, you're too early this time. I'm not done yet. She picked up a piece of fine grit sandpaper and went to work on the edges of a puzzle she'd just cut. You don't think we got enough stuff cluttering up the house already? As soon as the words left his mouth, David regretted sharing the thought. He knew where it would lead. You know I have to create, David. It's what keeps me sane on this planet. David sighed and said, I know, Soj. 1,000 years, she said. Sean smiled at the interaction. She was going to tell the story. Again. It probably annoyed his father, but Sean had grown up with it. The story was a familiar piece of lore for him, a comfort, something he shared with his mother. Sojourner worked at the puzzle pieces and said, I miss my people. We weren't always on Saturn, you know. David, who'd been in the process of quietly backing out of the hallway, stopped and made eye contact with Sean, creasing his eyebrows in confusion. Sean returned a small shrug. Sojourner didn't catch her husband's retreat or skepticism, speaking like a woman hypnotized. We left Sha'areen after the final war ended and the monarchy fell. The planet had been at the end of its life. We'd only accelerated the process. Following the whims of royal edict, my father was deposed, but that didn't stop the cataclysm. Fortunately, we didn't need spaceships to leave. We had technology that allowed us to travel through space without needing to construct such clumsy things like tunnels of light suited to our physiology. Sean made mental notes, appending the stories she told of Saturn with this newer, seemingly older piece. His mother had never spoken of this, of any time before Saturn. He'd always assumed that the ringed planet was the origin story. She stopped fiddling with the wood and instead fidgeted with the pendant around her neck. It was a swirling gold with diamond-cut facets surrounding a dull, muddy gemstone. I was so young when we arrived on Saturn. The engineers were just carving massive caverns and passages in the planet's icy crust. Despite the end of hostilities, I was still a part of the royal family, the sole heiress, and imprisoned for crimes of unreasoning before I was old enough to commit them. They expected so much from me from my gilded cage. The royals still had loyalists, however. They smuggled me out, sent me to Earth. I wonder if I've been gone long enough to satisfy them yet, he shrugged. David raised his eyebrows, a look of confusion on his face. He realized his mouth was hanging open and his coffee had gone cold. He snapped his lips together, kissed Sojourner on the cheek, and faded into the kitchen. Sean said, You think you'll go back, Mom? Sojourner smiled and leaned back. Maybe. One day. But not today. She winked at Sean. The doorbell rang and David called from the kitchen. Who the hell could that be in 7 feet of snow? Cold air filled the hallway and Sean could hear his father's voice echo up the stairs. Rome, you crazy nigga, what you doing out in this frozen mess? For his entire life, Sean had known Rome, his father's best friend. Their friendship went further back than David's relationship with Sojourner. Sean waited by the door as the two men thumped up the stairs. He could hear the crinkle of plastic over their bantering movements. To say that Rome was gaunt was to mistake him for weak. He looked like a pole of a man who'd be more comfortable on a basketball court than anywhere else, but the package camouflaged a fiercely intelligent person. The word revolution was never far from Rome's lips. He was quintessential brother, a true believer in Black liberation. It was such a part of him that it had become a part of his standard greeting. Sean, my little man, how goes the revolution? Rome held a fist out to Sean. I still don't know what you mean by that, Sean said, bumping fists with Rome. Oh, you will, little brother, you will. Rome's words seemed to come from his entire body, the way he turned his head, shook his shoulders, and leaned to emphasize his speech. Shoes, Sojourner said without looking in Rome's direction. Oh, right. Sorry, Serge. Rome kicked off leather high tops, revealing gray socks, and minced over to Sojourner to kiss her on the cheek. He kept his green jacket on, jamming gloves into the pockets. She smiled and said, "Hello, Rome," but continued working on the puzzle. Sean looked at Rome's shoes. The man had been wearing sneakers in this insane snow. It boggled Sean's mind. David slapped Rome on the back and hugged him with one arm. "What's with all the bags, man?" "Liberation, my brother. Come on in the kitchen." Sean followed the men. Rome dumped the bags on the table. Steaks spilled out, some ham, chicken pieces of all sorts too, all shrunk wrap over styrofoam plates with sticker prices and Star Market branding. Mixed amongst the meat were other things, such as fresh vegetables and boxed items like cereals and pasta. "Whoa," Sean marveled at the haul. Rome and David ignored Sean's outbursts and subsequent pawing through the pile. Stunned, David said, "What is up with all this, Rome?" "Yo, Daz, man, we snowed deep in here. You check the tubes, see all the National Guard plowing white neighborhoods? Where we at? Still under 7 feet of snow and running low on supplies. Well, market's right over the bridge. Looked like the snow caved in one of the big windows, so me and the brothers decided to become distributors." Rome smiled, and when he did, all the deep lines on his dark face curved, and he showed all his teeth through a dense beard between thick lips. "My man!" David cranked his right hand far back, and Rome did the same. Their palms cracked together, and they pulled each other close. Sean looked up from the pile of meat to see his mother in the doorway, an unreadable expression on her face as she regarded the two men. When she noticed Sean looking at her, she nodded, a little curve at the corners of her mouth, and went back to her project. Sean looked up at his father, and Rome said, "Are we going to be able to fit all this in the fridge?" The two men laughed. "I'm sure we'll figure it out. Besides, there's a whole freezer outside. We can always store some meat on the porch. How about you get started? Put all the vegetables away." "Okay." Sean set about moving the produce to the correct bins in the refrigerator. As carrots, celery, and some root he didn't recognize bounced around in the trays, a very random thought crossed his mind. "Hey, Rome." Rome turned toward Sean, spread his arms, and leaned back. "Yo, Sean, what's happening?" Always so extra, Sean thought. "You were there when my mom and dad met. How did it happen?" "Oh, man, they met and fell in love." "What got you thinking about that, young blood?" Rome's entire face scrunched up, and he shook his head from shoulder to shoulder like Stevie Wonder. Sean grimaced. "That's not much of an answer." Rome looked at David, who shrugged. "He asked you." And that's the end of that section.
Well, definitely have to let me know when that comes out, because we'll get that one for the store. Eventually, hopefully soon, we'll have more of your books or your books period in the store. But for now, Blood for Sun, All Dead Men, Lightning Wears a Red Cape. They're available on your website, I'm sure. They're also available through bookshop.org, which is a platform now that helps support local indie bookstores that are partnered with them, such as us. You can use our link to get there, pick his books, and a portion of sales come back to us to help support us. Or find out where it is. Go to indiebound.org. You can also search for the book title, and it'll tell you the store closest to you that may have it. And definitely give them a call. Errick, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Great reading too, by the way.
Thank you.
We got 2 more events coming up, so we're going to take a break tomorrow. We're going to come back on Friday with Al Leverone, and then we've got the crew from Haverhill House Publishing. So again, any last words?
Nope. This was reading this was definitely motivation to get me to actually finish this novel. There's explosions and intrigue and underground comic book shops and weird sexual encounters all coming right up.
Well, we're looking forward to it. And thank you for everybody on Facebook and on Zoom for joining us, and hope you'll join us again for the next couple.
All right. Thanks, Chris. And thanks everybody for coming. So good to see everyone.